In October 2000, the USS Eldridge, a U.S. Navy destroyer from World War II, was sent to a shipbreaking yard, marking the official end of its legendary journey. However, the mysterious urban legend surrounding this warship has persisted for decades. You've probably heard of the Philadelphia experiment. Interestingly, it never actually had a name of its own. It was part of a top-secret U.S. military project known as Project Rainbow. The main goal of Project Rainbow was to develop a technology that could make tanks, aircraft, submarines, and other military equipment invisible to radar. Those with some knowledge of military technology may know that modern stealth aircraft evade radar detection using radar-absorbent material, RAM, a special coating designed to absorb radar waves. But the U.S. military's approach in Project Rainbow was completely different. Instead of using special materials, they planned to use electromagnetic equipment to generate an enormous magnetic field, one so powerful that it could distort surrounding light waves and radio waves, effectively making any object inside the field undetectable by radar. This project was originally inspired by Einstein's unified field theory and his research on space-time distortion. According to rumors, the Philadelphia experiment involved some of the greatest minds in science, including Albert Einstein, Nikola Tesla, John von Neumann, and Thomas Townsend Brown. In June 1943, military researchers installed tons of experimental electronic equipment on the USS Eldridge. 2 tests were conducted later that year, one in July and another in October. Then came October 28th at 5:15 p.m. The final experiment began. As soon as the power was switched on, a massive magnetic field formed around the ship. A green fog slowly engulfed the USS Eldridge, making it impossible to see. Moments later, as the fog cleared, blinding blue flashes of light began flickering around the ship, and then, in an instant, the entire warship vanished from the water. At that moment, the scientists and crew stood frozen, their eyes wide with shock. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. A few minutes later, with a loud bang, the USS Eldridge suddenly reappeared at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, right where the experiment had started. Everyone looked at each other, their faces filled with confusion and fear. Had they just witnessed a ghost ship? Then an urgent report came in. Just moments ago, a warship had mysteriously appeared near the Norfolk Naval Shipyard in Virginia, and just as suddenly as it arrived, it vanished again. That's when the researchers realized what had really happened. The USS Eldridge had just teleported. But what happened next was even more terrifying. The USS Eldridge wasn't empty during the experiment. It was fully crewed. In other words, this was a live human experiment. When the researchers stepped aboard the USS Eldridge to inspect the aftermath, they were met with a horrifying sight. Some crew members were violently ill, suffering from extreme nausea and disorientation. Others seemed mentally unstable, unable to recall what had just happened. Some had completely vanished without a trace. But the most disturbing discovery? Several crew members had somehow fused into the ship's metal structure. Their bodies merged with the steel, as if they had been partially absorbed by the vessel itself. Even the survivors of the experiment were never the same again. Most of them had no memory of what happened, as if their minds had been wiped. Not long after, the U.S. Navy swiftly shut down all information related to the experiment. Every document was either destroyed or classified as top secret, ensuring that no trace of the Philadelphia experiment would remain. Now, you might be wondering, if the U.S. military erased all records of the experiment, how do we even know about it today? In 1955, a best-selling author named Morris Jessup received 2 mysterious letters from a man named Carlos Miguel Allende. In his letters, Carlos told Morris about a top-secret U.S. military experiment that took place during World War II, an experiment that would later be known as the Philadelphia experiment. He claimed to be one of the surviving crew members from that very test. However, the version of the Philadelphia experiment that Carlos described was quite different from the widely circulated urban legend we know today. But what exactly were those differences? And why did Carlos decide to reveal this secret to Morris, a best-selling author? We'll put those questions aside for now and come back to them later. In 1959, something even stranger happened. Morris mysteriously took his own life, and Carlos vanished for years. After that, rumors and conspiracy theories about the Philadelphia experiment spiraled out of control. Then, in 1969, when Carlos finally resurfaced, he denied everything. He claimed that the Philadelphia experiment was entirely fabricated, just a story he had made up. Without any concrete evidence to prove that the experiment ever took place, the story faded into the realm of urban legend. But even today, many people firmly believe that the Philadelphia experiment was real. Some even insist that, instead of shutting it down, the U.S. military continued the research in secret, eventually leading to an upgraded version of the project, the Montauk Project. The Montauk Project took place during the 1970s and 1980s, and its scope was far more ambitious than the Philadelphia experiment. It allegedly covered areas like time tunnels, time travel, mind control, and teleportation. The experiments were said to have been conducted in a top-secret underground laboratory at Montauk Air Force Base on Long Island, New York. Then, in 1990, an elderly man named Al Bielek came forward with a shocking claim. He was a survivor of both the Philadelphia experiment and the Montauk Project. Bielek was born in 1927 into an ordinary American family, and for most of his life, his memories seemed completely normal. But there was one thing that set him apart. He had memories from before he could even walk. He claimed he could remember crawling on the floor as a baby, and even more bizarrely, he could understand what the adults around him were saying. His mind was filled with all kinds of strange and complex knowledge, but even he had no idea where it came from. In 1984, the movie Philadelphia Experiment, based on the infamous event, was released in the United States. But Al Bielek didn't watch it until 4 years later, in 1988, when he finally sat down with his family to see what all the talk was about. For most people, it was just another sci-fi thriller, something to spark a casual debate about whether the dark experiment had really happened. And then, life went on as usual. But for Bielek, this was only the beginning of a nightmare. After watching the movie, he started experiencing terrifying flashbacks, memories that were so vivid and detailed that they felt real. At first, he ignored them, dismissing them as nothing more than his imagination running wild. But over time, the flashbacks became more frequent, more intense. He could hardly sleep. Desperate for answers, Bielek sought out psychologists and hypnotherapists to help him uncover the truth behind these disturbing visions. What he discovered shocked him to the core. He wasn't just some ordinary man. He was a survivor of a secret U.S. military experiment. And then came an even bigger revelation. Bielek claimed that Al Bielek wasn't even his real name. He said his true name was Edward Cameron, born in 1916, and that he had a brother named Duncan Cameron. In 1939, Edward and his brother Duncan Cameron enlisted in the U.S. Navy, unknowingly stepping into a top-secret experiment that would change their lives forever. By sheer chance, they became test subjects in the Philadelphia experiment and survivors of something unimaginable. According to Bielek, or rather Edward Cameron, the Montauk Project, an upgraded version of the Philadelphia experiment, had already achieved time travel and mind control. During the first experiment, his consciousness was sent forward in time to the year 2137. When he woke up, he found himself lying in a hospital bed, confused and disoriented. The world had completely changed. Between World War II and year 2137, massive global disasters had reshaped the planet. The West Coast and the southeastern U.S. were underwater. Atlanta was now a coastal city, and Florida had completely disappeared beneath the ocean. Bielek spent 6 weeks in year 2137 before he was suddenly forced into another time jump. This time, when he woke up, it was the year 2749. He had no memory of what triggered this second jump, but just like before, he regained consciousness in a hospital. Except this wasn't like any hospital he had ever seen. According to Bielek, he was fully wrapped in high-tech surgical materials and was receiving treatment using vibrations and light therapy. a technology far beyond anything we know today. The world of 2749 was completely controlled by a massive synthetic supercomputer, a machine that, according to Bielek, looked like a giant crystal. This advanced AI system wasn't just used for calculations or automation. It had the ability to connect directly to human consciousness through telepathy, transmitting information instantly to anyone who needed it. But the world had changed in other drastic ways. Humanity had endured 2 more large-scale wars, and as a result, the global population had been reduced to just 300 million. Central governments no longer existed. Money was also a thing of the past. Instead of using cash or digital currency, people relied on a credit-based system, where goods and services were exchanged based on individual credit value. By 2749, humans had also mastered anti-gravity technology, using it to create floating cities suspended above the Earth's surface. These cities weren't stationary. They drifted across the sky, their speed, position, and direction all controlled by the synthetic supercomputer. Despite this futuristic shift, some people chose to remain on the Earth's surface, living in traditional homes instead of the airborne metropolises. But with such incredible technological advancement came a terrifying realization. At one point, Bielek asked the people of that era, how can a single computer system control an entire community, even the entire world? To his surprise, the people of year 2749 were completely shocked that he would even ask such a question. In the future world, people never even questioned how things had come to be. Life was completely dominated by artificial intelligence, and no one ever stopped to ask why or how this had happened. Seeing this AI-controlled future made Bielek think of the Anglo-Saxon mission, a theory suggesting that the ultimate goal of secret global elites is population control and permanent AI rule. Bielek claimed he was trapped in the 28th century for 2 whole years before being sent back to the Montauk Project's experimental base in 1983. At the time, the project was experiencing unexpected complications and the facility was about to be shut down. To ensure secrecy, Bielek said the researchers implanted a subconscious command in his mind, forcing him to never reveal what he had experienced. He was then brainwashed, and as part of the final phase of the experiment, he was sent back in time to 1927, where he was reborn as Al Bielek. By the time 1990 rolled around, Bielek finally came forward with his incredible story, but almost no one believed him. After all, in 1990, computers were only just becoming mainstream. Telling people back then that AI would one day rule the world and that time travel was already possible, that was enough to make anyone think he was insane. But despite all the doubt and skepticism, the debate over the truth behind the Montauk Project has never stopped. In 2011, Al Bielek passed away, but as time went on and technology continued to evolve, people began to realize that the future world Bielek described might not be as impossible as it once seemed. And as it turned out, Bielek wasn't the only survivor of the Montauk Project. Another survivor, Stuart Swerdlow, was part of the Montauk mind control experiments. He was just a teenager when he was taken in for the experiments. According to Stuart, the subjects involved in the Montauk mind control experiments were exclusively boys known as the Montauk Boys. The reason? Boys and girls respond differently to changes in magnetic fields, and the neurological response in boys was better suited for the experiment's objectives. But here's where it gets even more disturbing. The mind control experiments conducted in the Montauk Project weren't exactly new. They were actually an extension of a top-secret CIA program from the 1950s called MKUltra, which was conducted in collaboration with the Canadian government. Unlike the Montauk Project, MKUltra is not just a conspiracy theory, it's a confirmed experiment. In 1975, declassified CIA documents officially exposed its existence, proving that the U.S. government had indeed conducted covert mind control experiments. In 1992, the Canadian government issued compensation to some of the victims of the MKUltra project. Then, in 1995, after taking office, U.S. President Bill Clinton made a public apology admitting that MKUltra was a special measure for a special time. However, Canadian journalist Elizabeth Nixon, whose father was a victim of MKUltra, challenged this narrative. He claimed that MKUltra was never truly shut down, it simply changed names and continued operating in secret. It was through MKUltra that the U.S. military first caught a glimpse of the true potential of the human brain. And that's why, in the 1970s, the Montauk Project's mind control experiments emerged as the next phase of this chilling research. Stuart Swerdlow described the horrifying experiences he endured during the Montauk experiments. He said he was strapped to an experimental platform, hooked up to various machines. While immense electromagnetic energy surged through his body, it felt like he was being ripped apart. At the same time, his mind was flooded with strange, random images like watching a movie at hyperspeed. Throughout his time in the Montauk Project, Stewart suffered from severe physical and mental effects, including internal bleeding, blurred vision, and memory loss. According to Stewart, the Montauk Project ran for over a decade, selecting tens of thousands of test subjects, but less than 1% survived. Even with claims from Carlos, Bielek, and Stewart, all of whom called themselves survivors of these secret experiments, many people still doubt the reality of the Philadelphia experiment and the Montauk Project. And to be fair, none of them ever produced solid evidence. Their claims rely entirely on their own words. During the 1970s and 1980s, when rumors about the Philadelphia experiment were spreading like wildfire, the U.S. Navy's Office of Naval Research was flooded with letters from the public, all asking the same question. Was the experiment real? In an effort to debunk the myth, the U.S. military declassified the USS Eldridge's logbook from October 1943. The records revealed that on October 28, 1943, the very day the Philadelphia experiment was said to have taken place, the USS Eldridge wasn't even in Philadelphia. To add to that, the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory, which was supposedly responsible for conducting the experiment, wasn't even founded until 1946, 3 years after the alleged event. So, does this mean we finally have the truth? Was it all just a ridiculous hoax? Well, what I'm about to share next might just change your mind. At the beginning of this video, we mentioned that in 1955, a man named Carlos, who claimed to be a survivor of the Philadelphia experiment, sent 2 letters to best-selling author Morris. These 2 letters were actually the very source that brought the Philadelphia experiment into the public eye. But here's the question. Why would Carlos reveal such top-secret information to a best-selling author? What was his true motive? The reason Carlos reached out to Morris had everything to do with a book Morris published in 1955, The Case for the UFO. In this book, Morris urged the U.S. government to study anti-gravity propulsion systems based on Einstein's unified field theory. This immediately triggered Carlos's memories of the horrors he had witnessed aboard the USS Eldridge during the Philadelphia experiment. Fearing that the military would conduct more inhumane experiments, he decided to reveal everything he had experienced in his letters. But here's the thing. Carlos's original letters never mentioned a specific experiment name, date, or even that it happened on the USS Eldridge. Naturally, Morris was skeptical. He demanded more evidence, but Carlos had nothing to prove his claims. So Morris dismissed the entire story as nothing more than wild speculation. Until 1956. That year, the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory received a mysterious anonymous package. Inside was a copy of The Case for the UFO, covered in handwritten notes. The margins were filled with dense commentary about UFOs and anti-gravity propulsion systems, and most shockingly, the notes urged the military to stop researching these technologies. This mysterious package immediately caught the attention of 2 U.S. Navy officers. Curious about the strange annotations, they decided to track down the book's author, Morris, assuming that he was the one who had written the notes. But as soon as Morris saw the handwriting, he immediately recognized it. It belonged to Carlos, the same man who had sent him those letters about the Philadelphia experiment. Realizing the connection, Morris handed over Carlos's original letters to the U.S. military. The military then launched an investigation, using the return address from the letters and package to track down Carlos. But when they arrived at the listed location, they found nothing. The address led to an abandoned farmhouse that had been empty for years, and just like that, Carlos had vanished. On April 20th, 1959, Morris was found dead in his car, which was parked in a nearby park not far from his home. A hose had been connected from the car's exhaust pipe and fed through the window, which was sealed shut with a blanket. The official cause of death is carbon monoxide poisoning. Authorities quickly ruled it a suicide, and the case was closed without further investigation. Then, 6 years later, in 1965, the first book about the Philadelphia experiment was published, Invisible Horizons. By 1967, another book titled New UFO Breakthrough by Brad Steiger hit the shelves. By this time, the Philadelphia experiment story had evolved significantly, with added details about the date, location, ship, and personnel involved. And this is how the legend of the Philadelphia experiment, as we know it today, was born. From that point on, public interest in the Philadelphia experiment never faded. Then, in 1969, after being missing for over a decade, Carlos suddenly reappeared in the public eye. This time, he made a shocking claim. Everything he wrote in his letters was completely made up. He insisted that the Philadelphia experiment never happened. But here's where things get strange. This isn't where the story ends. If you take a closer look, you'll find several inconsistencies in this version of events. For example, in the months leading up to his death, Morris, the author of The Case for the UFO, attended a private dinner party in New York. At that dinner, he gave 3 copies of his book, each containing Carlos's handwritten annotations, to 3 different friends. He then made an ominous request. "If anything happens to me, make sure these books are kept safe." Not long after, Morris was involved in a car accident in Florida, but he survived. Then, in April 1959, he was suddenly found dead in his car from an apparent suicide. Many believe that his death was more than just a coincidence, but here's something to think about. If Carlos really made everything up, then why did the U.S. military take his claims so seriously? Why did they launch an investigation into the Philadelphia experiment? And why did Carlos give a fake address, as if he was trying to avoid being found? Could it be that when he suddenly reappeared more than a decade later and claimed it was all fiction, he was simply trying to protect himself? And here's another mystery. In Carlos's original letters to Morris, his description of the Philadelphia experiment was vague and lacked details. So how did the widely circulated version of the story suddenly gain so many new details? Could it be that after Carlos's revelations, the U.S. military decided to play along, deliberately spreading the Philadelphia experiment story, but mixing in false details to distort the truth? If that were the case, it would serve 2 purposes. First, believers would think that the U.S. had achieved godlike technology, creating a psychological advantage over enemy nations during the Cold War. Second, skeptics would dismiss the Philadelphia experiment and Montauk Project as nothing more than fabricated conspiracy theories. Either way, the military loses nothing. So what do you think? How much of the Philadelphia experiment and the Montauk Project is fact, and how much is fiction? That's it for today's episode. See you in the next one.